You know, when you think about it, the scale of Battle Royale games is just staggering. We're talking hundreds of millions of players and billions of dollars. This isn't just a game genre anymore, it's a full-blown cultural force. So how on earth did this pretty simple, last one standing idea become one of the biggest things in entertainment? Well, the answer is this incredible mix of game design, human psychology, and community.
See, it goes way deeper than just fighting to be the last person in the final circle. The real story here is this constant tug of war. It's a delicate dance between the game's fundamental design, the psychology of why we play and why we open our wallets, and the non-stop, often chaotic conversation between the creators and the millions of us who basically live in these digital worlds.
Alright, so let's start at the beginning. What's the initial hook? What makes a player want to drop in over and over and over again? It all boils down to the engine that drives every single match. This brilliant, unpredictable clash between your own skill and just pure random luck.
I mean, at its core, the concept is almost laughably simple. You jump out of a plane with absolutely nothing, you scramble around looking for weapons and gear, and you try to survive as the map gets smaller and smaller. Simple, right?
So how does that basic loop turn into a global obsession for literally millions of people? The secret sauce isn't just in the shooting, it's in the unique story that every single match tells. And that story is written by two completely opposite forces. So on one side, you have everything that you control, your skill. We're talking about your aim, your strategy, your map knowledge. This is the stuff that makes you feel powerful, you know? Like your decisions actually matter. But then on the other side, you've got total randomness. Where the best loot spawns, where the safe zone decides to close in, even the random spray pattern of your gun. You have zero control over any of that. And that right there, that's the magic. Researchers have actually studied this, and it turns out this balance is everything. The game makes you feel like your skill gives you a real shot, so when you win, it feels earned. But that huge dose of randomness means even the best pro player can have a terrible game, and a brand new player could get lucky, find an amazing weapon, and pull off a miracle win. It turns every single match into its own unscripted action movie. Okay, so we've established the gameplay loop is super addictive. But that's just step one. To build a billion-dollar industry, you need players to be truly invested, like, on a much deeper emotional level. And that is where the fascinating psychology of virtual items comes into play. Believe it or not, there are actual academic models, like the theory of consumption values, that show us the decision to buy a digital cosmetic isn't just a whim. It's actually a pretty complex web of psychological drivers, but we can break it down into a few main ideas. So let's get into it. First, you've got what's called conditional value. That's when a skin is just perfect for, say, a special holiday event. Then there's emotional value, which is simple. Using that cool-looking item just makes you happy. And finally, monetary value, which is you feeling like you got a fair price. Think of these as the three basic pillars for any purchase. But then you get the superchargers. Trendiness is huge. You see your favorite streamer using an item and suddenly you've got to have it. And customization is all about your identity, right? It lets you show the world who you are inside that game. These factors don't just help the decision along, they pour gasoline on the fire, turning a simple purchase into a statement about who you are. Now, this level of player investment goes way beyond just cosmetics. It gets into the very DNA of how the game feels to play. Players have really strong opinions about what makes a game fun, but their wish list doesn't always line up with what developers are actually building. Just take a look at this. When you ask players what's important, they put a massive emphasis on core movement. We're talking about sprinting, jumping, vaulting over things. These are the fundamental actions that give you that sense of fluid control. This is what players say makes a game feel good. But now, let's flip that. Let's look at the mechanics that developers consistently implement across the top games. It's not the fancy movement systems. It's the standardized combat stuff, aiming down sights and reloading. You'll find these in pretty much every single title. You starting to see a pattern here?
And here's the big takeaway. There's a really clear gap between what players want and what developers focus on. Players are crying out for dynamic, complex movement, but developers often prioritize making sure the combat feels familiar and standard. Why? Well, think about it. Standard combat is easier to balance, it appeals to a wider audience, and it's less complicated to develop. It's this fascinating tension between the player's fantasy and the reality of production. This tension isn't just some abstract idea about game mechanics. It really defines the entire relationship between the people making the game and the people playing it. See, these games are never truly finished, and that creates this constant and sometimes very, very tense feedback loop.
Here is a perfect example. The developers release a set of patch notes. They say they've identified a problem. Reversing vehicles into compounds has been an overly powerful tactic. So to fix it, they're reducing their reverse speed. Sounds totally reasonable, right? They're listening to feedback and making a change.
And then the community responds. You have this player who's put over 3,000 hours into the game, and they are just completely confused. They've literally never seen this so-called overly powerful tactic happen, not even once. To them, the developer's explanation feels like it's from another planet.
Then another player jumps in with some critical context. They point out that, okay, maybe this is a thing in TPP, that's third-person perspective, but they argue that in FPP, first person, which a lot of the hardcore community prefers, nobody does this. The reaction isn't just simple disagreement, it's total disbelief, and it perfectly captures that disconnect when developers create a solution for a problem the community doesn't even think exists.
All of which brings us to the ultimate question for these massive, always evolving games. When a game stops being just a product and becomes a hobby, a community, even a career for millions of people, who really gets to decide what it should be? Is it the creators with their original vision? Or is it the collective community that actually lives inside that world and keeps it alive day in and day out? That right there is the real Battle Royale.